Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the world of money laundering.
Oh, yeah.
You've given us a really interesting mix of sources for this one. Videos, expert opinions, even a peek into a major undercover operation.
Wow.
I'm already feeling a bit like a financial detective.
You know, it's funny you should say that because approaching this topic with that detective's mindset can be really helpful.
Oh.
Yeah. Money laundering, it isn't just something you see in movies.
Yeah.
It's a whole global system with real consequences.
Wow.
And like any good detective story, there are clues, patterns, and a whole lot of intrigue to uncover.
Okay, so let's get started then. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you give us the elevator pitch? What exactly is money laundering?
Sure. At its core, it's the art of disguise. Criminals, they take money obtained through illegal activities, so, think drug trafficking or fraud or really anything you can think of.
Right.
And they try to make it look like it came from legitimate sources. It's kind of like giving dirty money a financial makeover.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it can be used in the legal economy without raising any suspicion.
So it's not about hiding the money, but about creating like a cover story for it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's all about weaving a narrative that makes the money's origins untraceable.
Okay.
And that way, criminals can enjoy their ill-gotten gains without, without getting caught.
Right.
And trust me, they've come up with some really, really creative methods to do this.
Okay, so our sources actually break this art of disguise down into 3 distinct stages.
Yeah.
Almost like a criminal recipe.
I like that analogy. The first stage is called placement. That's where criminals actually introduce their dirty money into the financial system.
Okay.
And that's where they hit their first hurdle, which is avoiding detection.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Especially when you're dealing with, with large sums of cash. Think about it. You can't just waltz into a bank with a duffel bag full of cash.
Right.
Without setting off some serious alarms.
Yeah. And that's where those suspicious activity reporting thresholds that banks have come in, right?
Exactly.
So they have to report any transaction over a certain amount.
Exactly. These thresholds, they vary by country and by the specific institution, but criminals are aware of them.
Right.
And they'll use various tactics to try and slip under the radar. One common tactic is called structuring.
Wow.
And what they'll do is break down large sums into much smaller deposits that fall below that reporting limit.
I see.
It's kind of like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon.
Wow.
It's tedious, but it does avoid attracting unwanted attention.
Right. And then there's smurfing, right? Where they basically recruit a network of people.
Right.
Often people who don't even know what's really going on.
Right.
To make those smaller deposits for them.
Precisely.
So they're spreading the money out like breadcrumbs to make it harder to track.
It's a classic case of strength in numbers.
Yeah.
They use this decentralized approach to really avoid that detection. And then once the money is successfully placed into the system, the next stage is where things get really interesting. Layering.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this layering stage. What do they do there?
Well, you can think of it as creating a financial smokescreen. They'll engage in all these complex transactions, moving money between accounts, between different countries, sometimes even converting it into different assets, all to obscure its true origin.
Okay.
It's really like creating a tangled web.
Wow.
So intricate that even the most skilled financial investigator would have a tough time untangling it.
So they're essentially creating a labyrinth,
Yeah.
a financial labyrinth.
Exactly. Making it almost impossible to trace the money back to its illegal source. They might use shell companies, which are, businesses that only exist on paper, to move money around.
I see.
Or they might invest in assets like real estate or artwork,
Okay.
where the value is very subjective and the transactions can be easily manipulated.
So they're really using the complexity of the global financial system to their advantage.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. They're constantly looking for those vulnerabilities, looking for loopholes.
Right.
And they're exploiting the interconnectedness of the markets to their benefit.
Wow.
And then once they've successfully muddied the waters, they move on to the final stage, which is integration.
Okay, so what happens in the grand finale of this financial deception?
Integration. It's the culmination of the whole money laundering process.
Okay.
So the now clean money is reintroduced back into the legitimate economy. This is where they finally get to enjoy their ill-gotten gains.
Okay.
You know, they can invest in businesses, they can buy luxury goods, or just simply live a life of extravagant spending.
Right.
But now they can do it without raising any suspicion.
So it's almost like completing the illusion, right?
Okay.
Making the dirty money disappear and then reappear as legitimate wealth.
Yeah, they might set up front companies, so these are businesses that look legitimate, but they're actually controlled by the criminals.
Oh, wow.
And that way they can generate what seems like clean income. Or they might use, fake invoices to create the appearance of real business transactions.
Yep.
Their goal is to create a plausible explanation for the origin of their wealth.
Right.
It's not just about moving the money. It's about really crafting this convincing narrative, making it seem like it was all earned legally.
It makes it really hard to spot.
Exactly. And that's what makes money laundering so insidious. It allows these criminals not only to profit from their illegal activities, but to integrate themselves into society. They appear as legitimate business people. They might even be philanthropists.
Oh, yeah.
But all along, their wealth is built on a foundation of criminal activity.
Right. And our sources point out this surprising array of businesses that could be used for money laundering.
Oh, yeah.
Some are pretty obvious, like casinos where huge sums of cash are always changing hands.
Right.
Others are much more inconspicuous.
Right.
Seemingly innocent businesses like nail salons or car washes, even candy stores.
The choice of business will often depend on the scale of the operation,
Right.
and also the specific methods they're using.
Okay.
For instance, a high-end art gallery might be used to launder large sums through, sales of overpriced artwork. While a small cash-based business, like that car wash you mentioned, that might be used for the placement stage.
Oh, okay.
To discreetly introduce smaller amounts of dirty money into that financial system.
I see. One source even mentioned overpriced air fresheners at a car wash.
I saw that.
Which is, it's a seemingly mundane item, but it can be used to inflate those sales figures and disguise their illegal profits.
Exactly.
It just shows how money laundering can really be hidden in plain sight, even in the most unexpected places.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating and, to be honest, a little bit unsettling. Money laundering isn't just something that's happening in some far-off criminal underworld.
Right.
It's happening all around us, often, like we said, hidden in plain sight. And the more we understand about how it works, the better equipped we are to actually spot those red flags.
Okay.
And, protect ourselves from becoming unwitting participants.
That's a good point. Speaking of red flags, our sources, they also go into some real-world examples and case studies.
Yes.
To show how all these concepts actually play out.
Right.
I'm particularly interested in that pizza connection case you mentioned earlier.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But this was a very real and very sophisticated operation. Back in the 1980s, a network of what seemed like regular pizzerias across the U.S., they were actually being used as a front for this massive heroin trafficking and money laundering operation.
So they were using pizza as a cover for something far more sinister.
Exactly. These pizzerias, they served as distribution points for the drugs, and the profits were then laundered through all these inflated sales figures. So on paper, it looked like the money was just coming from legitimate pizza sales.
Oh, wow.
It was a brilliant, albeit incredibly nefarious scheme.
Right.
And it allowed these criminals to operate right under everyone's noses.
It's incredible how creative criminals can get when it comes to disguising their activities.
Right.
It makes you wonder how many other seemingly legitimate businesses are out there being used for the same purpose.
Well, that's the question that keeps a lot of investigators up at night,
Yeah.
And with the rise of new technologies, with these increasingly complex financial instruments, the methods of money laundering they're constantly evolving.
Right.
It's getting harder and harder to detect and prevent.
Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of new technologies, our sources also talk about the role of cryptocurrency in money laundering.
Yeah.
I've heard that it's become kind of a favorite tool for criminals.
Oh, yeah.
For those who want to move money under the radar. Is that true?
It's absolutely true. The decentralized and often pseudonymous nature of cryptocurrencies makes them incredibly attractive for money laundering.
I see.
Transactions are very difficult to trace.
Right.
And the lack of a central authority makes it a lot harder for law enforcement to step in.
So it's almost like the Wild West of finance.
Yeah.
Where criminals can operate with a degree of anonymity and freedom that traditional financial systems just don't allow.
That's a good analogy. And criminals have actually developed some very sophisticated techniques to further obscure their activities in that crypto world.
Okay.
The source material mentioned the Lazarus Group. They're this group of North Korean hackers.
Okay.
They've been linked to several high-profile crypto heists.
Wow.
And they're using techniques like peel chains and mixers to break down the stolen funds, and it makes them virtually untraceable.
So they're basically using the same features that make cryptocurrency attractive.
Yeah.
So that decentralization, that anonymity,
exactly,
to their advantage.
It's not just high-level hacking groups that are exploiting cryptocurrencies for this either.
Oh.
Our sources even mention that online gaming platforms like Roblox,
Oh, wow.
a very popular game among children, even that has been used to launder money.
Wait, so kids' games are being used for money laundering? How's that even possible?
Well, it just goes to show how adaptable these schemes really are. Criminals are always looking for new avenues to exploit.
Right.
And they've found that those virtual economies within these online games can be the perfect cover for their activities.
I see.
They might buy and sell virtual items at inflated prices, for example.
Okay.
Using the game's currency to move and disguise illicit funds.
That's kind of unsettling to think about.
It is.
That even something that seems as innocent as a children's game can be manipulated for these criminal purposes.
Yeah. It highlights the pervasive nature of money laundering and the constant need for vigilance, really.
It does. It speaks to the need for increased awareness and education,
Yes.
And not just among law enforcement and financial institutions, but among the general public as well.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about the methods and the motivations behind money laundering,
yeah,
the better equipped we are to actually identify it and prevent it.
And speaking of understanding the motivations behind money laundering,
yeah, we
actually have some incredible insights from Robert Mazur.
Oh, right.
He's that former undercover agent who infiltrated Pablo Escobar's cartel.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
His story is really a deep dive in itself. He spent years building this believable undercover persona,
well,
gaining the trust of some of the world's most dangerous criminals.
Right.
All to expose, the inner workings of their money laundering operation.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It was an incredibly dangerous and meticulous operation.
Oh, wow.
It really required, incredible courage and dedication.
He talks about how he created a fake identity.
Yeah, Robert Musella.
Robert Musella.
Yeah, a businessman supposedly from Staten Island.
Right.
Complete with this lavish lifestyle, a private jet, even a chain of jewelry stores on the East Coast.
That does sound like something out of a Hollywood movie.
It does, but the stakes were very real.
Right.
Mazur had to convince the cartel that he was a legitimate businessman.
Yeah.
Someone they could trust with their money. And to do that, he had to live the part.
Wow.
He had to immerse himself in this world of extravagance and danger.
So he was basically living a double life.
Exactly. Walking a tightrope between his true identity and his undercover persona.
That's amazing.
And the pressure must have been immense.
Yeah.
He was constantly under surveillance, both by the cartel and by his own team.
Right.
One wrong move could have, blown his cover, put his life in jeopardy.
It must have taken an incredible toll on him.
Yeah. Both physically and emotionally. In his book, he talks about the psychological strain of living a lie for so long.
Right.
The constant fear of being exposed, the toll it took on, his relationships. But he was driven by this deep sense of purpose, I think. Yeah. This belief that what he was doing was making a real difference in the fight against organized crime.
And his work did make a difference, right?
It did.
I mean, he was able to gather crucial evidence, led to convictions of numerous high-level cartel members.
Right.
And it exposed how complicit several financial institutions were in their money laundering schemes.
His story shows just how important human intelligence is in combating these complex criminal networks. Sometimes it takes someone on the inside, someone who can gain the trust of these criminals.
Right.
And expose their operations from within.
It's like a real-life game of cat and mouse.
Yeah.
With investigators and criminals constantly trying to outmaneuver each other.
Exactly. And as we've seen, this game is only getting more sophisticated. Right. Criminals are exploiting these new technologies, and they're finding new ways to exploit the vulnerabilities of that global financial system.
It's a sobering thought, and it leads us to this crucial question.
Yeah.
What can be done to stop this?
Right.
How can we actually combat money laundering in a world where these financial transactions are becoming more complex and more interconnected?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer, but I think one thing that is clear is that it requires a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
A combination of strong regulations,
right,
international cooperation, and also innovative investigative techniques. We also need to be much more aware of those risks and those red flags,
right,
both as individuals and as a society.
It's a global problem, so it's gonna require a global solution.
Exactly. Criminals, they don't respect borders. So why should our efforts to stop them be limited by them?
Right. That makes sense. Our research also mentions the importance of strengthening those regulations.
Yes.
Closing those loopholes that allow for the abuse of these financial systems.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a constant battle.
Yeah.
As fast as we close one loophole, the criminals are already looking for the next one.
It is an ongoing challenge, that's for sure. But there have been some positive developments as well.
Oh.
For example, many countries have implemented stricter Know Your Customer or KYC regulations.
Oh, right.
And these require financial institutions to actually verify the identities of their clients.
Okay.
And assess their risk profiles.
So it's not just about opening an account, but it's about making sure that the person opening the account is, who they say they are.
Exactly.
And that their money's coming from legitimate sources.
Precisely. And there's a growing emphasis on what's called beneficial ownership transparency.
Okay.
So this means identifying the individuals who actually own or control companies and trusts.
Oh, okay.
And this helps to prevent, criminals from hiding behind all those layers of anonymity. It makes it much harder for them to, move money through shell companies.
It sounds like there's a real push to shine light on the darker corners of the financial world.
There is.
Make it more transparent and accountable.
Exactly. And technology is actually playing a much more important role in these efforts. Law enforcement agencies are using all sorts of sophisticated data analytics tools.
Okay.
To track those financial transactions, to identify suspicious patterns, and connect the dots between activities that might seem unrelated at first.
So it's like using big data to fight financial crime.
That's a good way to put it. And artificial intelligence is also being used to develop predictive models.
Okay.
Which can identify potential money laundering activities even before they happen.
Oh, wow. That's pretty impressive.
It is.
But it also raises some concerns about privacy and the potential for misuse of this technology.
It does.
So where do we draw the line between, security and personal freedom?
That is a very crucial question, and one that we as a society have to carefully consider as we develop and implement these new technologies. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And it's important to have those open and honest conversations about the trade-offs involved.
We need to make sure that these powerful tools are being used responsibly and ethically.
Yes.
And that they don't infringe on the rights of individuals.
Absolutely. It's about, finding that right balance between security and freedom.
Right.
Between fighting crime and protecting those individual liberties. It's a complex challenge.
Yeah.
But one that we just can't afford to ignore.
You've given us a lot to think about, from shell companies and flower shops to the potential of artificial intelligence. It's clear that money laundering is this multifaceted issue with far-reaching implications. Yeah. But I think what really stands out to me is just the realization that this isn't just a problem for governments and financial institutions. It affects all of us.
You've hit the nail on the head. Money laundering, it fuels these criminal enterprises. It weakens our economies. And it undermines the rule of law. It's a global problem. Yeah. It requires a global response. And each of us has a role to play in combating it.
So what can we do as individuals? What are some practical steps that we can take to protect ourselves and and actually make a difference?
That's a great question. And it's one that we will delve into as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of money laundering. Stay tuned, because understanding how this system works is, it's the first step in combating it.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go into some specific examples and case studies that really illustrate just how pervasive and impactful money laundering can be.
Sounds good. So, ready to unpack some of these real-world cases?
Oh yeah, I'm fascinated by this stuff. It's crazy to see how these techniques that we've been talking about actually play out.
Yeah.
With real consequences.
Yeah, these aren't just headlines.
Right.
They really show how vulnerable the global financial system can be.
Okay. One that really caught my eye in the research was that laundromat scheme.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
Back in 2020, billions of dollars, shell companies, complicit banks. It sounds like something out of a financial thriller.
It was a massive operation. I mean, just imagine this network of shell companies.
Right.
Each one like a ghost in the financial world.
Yeah.
Just transferring money back and forth across borders.
Yeah.
Making it incredibly difficult to follow the trail.
So it's not just about hiding the money.
Right.
It's about making the transactions so complex.
Yeah, so convoluted.
That they're basically untraceable.
Precisely. And the fact that there were multiple banks involved across all these different jurisdictions made it even more challenging to unravel. It was a real wake-up call, I think, that money laundering is often a transnational crime.
Right.
So you need international cooperation to really investigate and prosecute it effectively.
It seems like the criminals are always a step ahead,
Yeah.
They're always exploiting loopholes and weaknesses in the system. It makes you wonder if regulations and enforcement can ever really keep pace.
That's the constant challenge, absolutely.
Yeah.
But, these cases also highlight the crucial role of, whistleblowers and investigative journalists.
Oh, right.
They're the ones exposing these schemes.
Yeah.
Without their courage and determination, a lot of these operations would stay hidden.
Speaking of hidden operations, our research also mentions a case involving drug cartels using seemingly innocent businesses, like flower shops.
I remember that one. Yeah.
To move both money and merchandise.
Yeah.
It's pretty chilling to think about that. That this criminal activity could be happening right under our noses.
It's a tactic that's been used for a long time.
Right.
Using a legitimate business as a front to disguise illegal activities. In this case, the flower shops, they had this dual purpose. They were receiving shipments of drugs, hidden among the flowers.
Wow.
And then they would funnel the profits back to the cartel by inflating the sales figures.
So it's like those overpriced air fresheners at the car wash we talked about before.
Exactly.
They're using, everyday goods and services to mask those illegal transactions.
You got it. It's all about blending in, making the illegal activity look like it's just, part of a normal business operation.
Right.
And it's incredibly effective, especially with those cash-based businesses where it's harder to track, the flow of money.
And then there's Robert Mazur's story.
Oh, yeah. What a story.
I mean, he actually witnessed firsthand how Pablo Escobar's cartel used layering techniques to move and disguise their money. It's fascinating and, to be honest, a little terrifying to hear about these schemes from someone who was actually on the inside.
It does give you a pretty rare glimpse into the inner workings of these criminal organizations. Mm-hmm. I mean, he describes how the cartel would deposit huge amounts of cash into accounts, in places like Luxembourg.
Oh, man.
Then they would use those deposits as collateral for loans in other parts of the world.
So they were essentially using dirty money to leverage clean money.
Precisely. And then those loan proceeds would be transferred to shell companies in places like Panama, further obscuring that money trail, making it nearly impossible to trace it back to its, illegal source.
It sounds like they were creating a financial house of mirrors.
Yeah.
Designed to confuse and mislead anyone who was trying to follow the money.
Exactly. By the time the money reached its final destination, it was basically indistinguishable from legally obtained funds. It was a brilliant scheme, incredibly dangerous, of course.
Yeah.
But it allowed the cartel to operate on this huge global scale.
It really makes you realize that money laundering isn't just about hiding money.
No.
It's about integrating it into the legitimate economy.
Yeah, making it seem like it was earned legally.
Right.
And that's what makes it so incredibly difficult to combat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not just about catching the criminals. It's about unraveling these really complex financial transactions, tracing money across borders, and then exposing the, often hidden networks of individuals and institutions that are involved.
It's like trying to solve this giant financial jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
With pieces scattered all over the world.
That's a great analogy. And as we've been discussing, the puzzle is constantly changing.
Right.
With criminals finding new ways to exploit the system.
Right.
And stay ahead of law enforcement.
So what can be done?
Right.
How can we effectively combat money laundering when these financial transactions are, becoming more complex and interconnected all the time?
That's the question everyone's asking. There's no silver bullet. But one thing's clear: international cooperation is essential.
Right.
Money laundering is a global problem. It needs a global solution.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Criminals don't respect borders, so our efforts to stop them shouldn't be limited by them either.
Exactly. We need information sharing between countries.
Right.
Coordinated investigations and a more harmonized approach to regulation and enforcement.
Okay. Our research also mentioned the importance of strengthening regulations.
Yes.
Closing those loopholes that allow for this abuse of, financial systems. It seems like that's a constant battle, though. Criminals are always, looking for new ways to exploit weaknesses.
It is a constant challenge. Yeah. But, there have been some positive developments.
Okay.
A lot of countries have implemented these stricter know your customer regulations. KYC, exactly. And these regulations require financial institutions to verify the identities of their clients.
Right.
And to assess their risk profiles.
So it's not just about opening an account anymore.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that the person opening the account is who they say they are.
Exactly.
And that their money's is coming from legitimate sources.
Precisely. And there's this growing emphasis on what's called beneficial ownership transparency.
Right. Right.
So this means identifying the individuals who ultimately own or control, these companies and trusts.
Okay.
And this helps to prevent criminals from hiding behind all those layers of anonymity.
Right.
And it makes it a lot harder to move money through those shell companies.
It seems like there's a real effort to shine a light on these darker corners of the financial world.
There is.
And to make it more transparent and accountable.
Absolutely. And technology is playing a big role in that. Law enforcement agencies, they're using all these, these sophisticated data analytics tools to track financial transactions, to identify those suspicious patterns, and to, connect the dots between activities that might seem unrelated.
So it's like using big data to fight financial crime.
That's a good way to put it. And they're even using artificial intelligence, to develop these predictive models that can actually identify potential money laundering activities even before they happen.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
It is.
But it also raises concerns about privacy and the potential misuse of that technology.
Yeah, that it does.
So where do we draw the line between security and personal freedom?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we need to be very carefully considering, as we develop and implement these new technologies. It's a real balancing act.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to have these open and honest conversations about the trade-offs.
We need to make sure that these powerful tools are being used responsibly and ethically.
Yes.
And that they don't, infringe on the rights of individuals.
Absolutely. It's about finding that right balance between security and freedom.
Right.
Between fighting crime and protecting those individual liberties. It's a tough challenge.
Yeah.
But it's one we just can't afford to ignore.
You've given us a lot to think about, from shell companies and flower shops to the potential of artificial intelligence. It's clear that money laundering is this really multifaceted issue.
It is.
With these far-reaching implications. But I think what really stands out to me is this realization that it's not it's not just a problem for governments
Right.
and financial institutions. It affects all of us.
You're absolutely right. Money laundering, it fuels criminal enterprises, it weakens our economies, and it undermines the rule of law. It's a global problem. Right.
And it demands a global response. And we, each of us has this role to play in combating it.
So what can we do as individuals? What are some practical steps that what we can take to protect ourselves and contribute to this fight?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll definitely explore as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of money laundering.
Okay.
Stay tuned, because understanding how this system works, it's the first step in combating it.
We've uncovered a lot in this deep dive: the techniques, the players, the global scale of it all. But beyond just the financial part of it, I think there's this human cost that we can't ignore.
I completely agree. It's easy to get lost in, all the details of shell companies and offshore accounts. But we can't forget that behind every dirty dollar, there's a story of exploitation and corruption and harm. It really struck me as we were going through all these sources, the impact of money laundering. It goes so much further than just lining the pockets of criminals.
Yeah.
It really has these ripple effects that touch every aspect of our lives.
It's true. Money laundering, it gives a financial lifeline to these criminal organizations. So it fuels all kinds of things, from drug trafficking to human trafficking, even terrorism and political corruption.
Right.
And these activities, they destabilize societies. They erode trust in institutions. They create an environment of fear and insecurity.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Money laundering enables crime.
Right.
And then that crime generates more money to launder. It's a system that just feeds itself.
Yeah.
And it has these devastating consequences for, individuals and communities and even entire nations.
And, it's often the most vulnerable members of society that feel those consequences most acutely.
Right.
Think about the victims of human trafficking.
Yeah.
People who are forced into labor or sexual exploitation. Their lives are traded for profit that is then, laundered through that financial system.
Yeah. It's a horrific reality that we can't turn away from.
No, we can't.
It's heartbreaking to think about,
Yeah.
the human suffering it's hidden beneath the surface of all these, financial transactions.
It is. And it makes this issue feel so much more personal.
Yeah, it does.
Much more urgent. Personal, we might not see it directly, but money laundering, it really does touch all of our lives in countless ways.
Right.
It drives up the cost of goods and services. It weakens our economies. It erodes trust in our institutions. And, it's not just about the economic impact either.
Yeah, you're right.
It fuels violence and instability, both domestically and internationally.
Yeah. Think about the drug wars in Mexico, for example, and the devastating impact that's had on communities on both sides of the border.
Mm-hmm.
The violence is fueled by the profits from drug trafficking, which are then laundered through that global financial system.
Yeah, and it's not just about violence either.
Right.
Money laundering also undermines democracy and the rule of law.
Right.
Corrupt officials will use it to enrich themselves.
Oh, yeah.
They divert public funds. They undermine public trust.
Right.
It creates this system where the wealthy and the powerful, they can operate above the law.
Yeah.
While the rest of us are, we're the ones who pay the price.
So it's not just about protecting the integrity of the financial system.
No.
It's about protecting our communities, our values, our way of life.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for all of us to be aware of this issue.
Yeah.
To understand the methods they're using and to be vigilant, I think, in our own financial dealings.
One of the things that I found really surprising in our research is that money laundering isn't always about completely hiding money.
Right.
Sometimes it's about making it look like you earned it legitimately.
Yeah.
So you can spend it without raising those red flags.
That's a really good point. It's not always about completely erasing the money's origin, but it's about creating this believable cover story.
Right.
A way to explain why it exists and justify its use.
Our sources highlighted this technique called the loan backs scheme.
Oh, right.
Where criminals will they'll deposit their dirty money in a foreign bank,
Right.
and then use that as collateral to secure a loan back in their own country.
Yeah, it's a pretty clever way to transform those illicit funds into, seemingly legitimate assets.
Yeah.
The loan proceeds can then be used for investments or purchases or just, to fund a lavish lifestyle. And they can do it all without attracting any unwanted attention.
So they're basically laundering the money while also creating this seemingly legitimate source of income. It's a win-win for the criminal, at least, in the short term.
It might seem that way on the surface, but these schemes, they're incredibly risky. And they can lead to some very serious legal consequences if they're ever exposed.
Right.
And, we have to remember that law enforcement agencies are they're constantly adapting their own techniques as well.
Right.
That financial intelligence trail is getting harder and harder to erase.
So it's a good reminder that there's no such thing as a foolproof money laundering scheme.
No, there isn't.
Sooner or later, these operations, they tend to unravel,
Right.
leaving a trail of evidence and a lot of unhappy criminals.
It all comes back to vigilance. We all have a role to play in this fight against money laundering, from reporting suspicious activity to being mindful of, our own financial transactions.
So what can we do as individuals? What are some practical steps that we can take to protect ourselves and contribute to this fight against against this global problem?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about being informed.
Right.
The more you understand about how money laundering actually works,
Yeah.
the better equipped you'll be to spot those red flags.
Okay.
And avoid becoming an unwitting participant.
So doing a deep dive like this is actually, it's a great place to start.
Exactly. It's about educating yourself, asking questions, and staying informed about, the latest trends,
Right.
the latest techniques. Knowledge is power.
It is.
And in this fight against money laundering, it's our most valuable weapon.
What else can we do?
Be cautious in your financial dealings.
Okay.
Do your due diligence when you're choosing business partners.
Yeah.
Be wary of, offers that seem too good to be true. And if you see any suspicious activity, report it to the authorities.
Yeah. If something feels off, it probably is.
Right.
Trust your instincts and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Absolutely. And remember, even small actions can make a difference. Support organizations that are working to combat money laundering.
Yeah.
Advocate for stronger regulations and enforcement.
So it's about being proactive.
Yeah.
Being vigilant and just being part of the solution.
Exactly. Money laundering, it thrives in the shadows. And by shedding light on this issue, by understanding how it works, the devastating impact that it has, we can work together.
Yeah.
Towards a safer, more just and more equitable world.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really struck by this realization that money laundering it's a complex problem.
It is.
With these far-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
But I'm also feeling hopeful. The fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that that people are becoming more aware of this issue, that's a positive sign.
It is. Awareness is the first step towards change.
Right.
And by working together, by sharing information, collaborating across borders, we can really make a difference.
So, to our listener, what are your takeaways from this deep dive? What stood out to you? And most importantly, how can you use this knowledge to help you navigate all the complexities of the financial world, and to make informed decisions that really align with your values?
This is just the beginning of your exploration, really.
Yeah.
There's so much information out there about money laundering. Its history, how it's evolved, and the ongoing efforts to combat it. Don't stop here. Keep digging, keep learning, keep asking questions.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thank you for joining us on the journey into the intricate and often shadowy world of money laundering. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, dive deep.